She didn't even switch the light off when she took it. The bulb hung from a frayed cord over my father's workbench, trembling in the draft as the garage door stuttered upward. The glow laid itself over chrome and dust, and over my sister's smile in the windshield as she backed our father's antique Buick into the lane like a bride easing down a staircase. She mouthed something, maybe, "It'll be quick." And then the tail lights slipped through the maple shadows and were gone. The smell stayed, cold oil, old leather, the sweet iron of a place too honest for too long. On the bench, a coffee can of wing nuts and bent screws sat where it always had, and the rag Dad favored red frayed waited beside the spark plug gap gauge that looks like a coin. The empty bay felt like a mouth closed around a secret, warm air unwinding into winter evening. 1953 Buick Roadmaster. Sea mist green, gentled by dust. Fender lines a man can trace with one finger and remember what he stands for. Dad didn't buy it new. He bought it after 50 and chose to teach dignity a different way. He restored it slowly, paycheck to paycheck, letting chrome come back like a memory that prefers not to be rushed. He kept it running through winters that sounded like glass cracking. Some men tell their sons rules. Mine taught me torque. Elaine will tell you she didn't steal it. To her, the car is family, and family is a gloved hand in a communal pocket. She is 8 years younger than me, and walks like floors are flattered to carry her. As a child, she passed Dad's sockets in order. As an adult, she learned to perform grief in sequence. The first time she took the Buick, she texted a photo afterward. Wind in her hair, lipstick the color of expensive berries. "Took Dad for a spin," she wrote, as if remembering absolved taking. I set my phone face down and listened to the refrigerator hum like a man clearing his throat. That night, she brought the car back with a kiss of fuel smell and a story about people waving at stoplights. Polite, pleased, careful to make theft look like tribute. Tonight, no photo. Tonight, she wanted to be seen leaving and applauded arriving. There's a difference between driving a thing and arriving in it. The Roadmaster is long enough to be mistaken for authority. People straighten when it passes. This town recognizes that silhouette the way it recognizes a hard winter. They also recognize who kept it alive. My name isn't on a plaque, but it's on the calluses. I pulled the chain, left the garage dark, and stood in the rectangle where the car had sat. The concrete kept the heat of its weight for a while, little pockets of October visiting the knees of January. Dad used to say an engine has reluctance, like a horse on his power with a mind of its own. You don't bully it, he'd say. You persuade it. He died 3 winters ago, late January, the kind of cold that makes wood remember it was once a tree. In the hospital, he took my hand mine, not Elaine's, and made his last repair. A blessing disguised as instruction. You keep the place clean, he said, meaning the garage and what lived in it. I promised. Quietly, heavily. The will named the house to me, the land under it, and all appurtenances and accessory structures. The lawyer read it with the soft boredom of a man who files feelings alphabetically. Elaine smiled and squeezed my arm as if to say, "See, we're all one." Later she would repeat that Dad once told her all the car stories, which is as good as saying he gave her the car. Grief makes historians of the loud. I walked to the road and followed the sound of the Buick longer than I could see it. The engine's purr sat low and wide, a heart at rest. She would take it past the diner, past the courthouse, past the lake road where headlights float in black water, and make drivers believe in destiny for 2 miles. You think a man like me would shout, drag the law up the driveway by its collar. But anger rarely changes the price of anything. Ownership does. And ownership, real ownership, doesn't begin with keys. It begins with ground. When I was 12, Dad spread folded land maps across the kitchen table and traced our lot lines with his thumbnail until the blue ink bruised. People fight over the shiny, he said, and forget the dirt under it. Win the dirt, the shiny kneels. I understood the lesson wasn't about a car. Back in the kitchen, the stove clock was 5 minutes slow, as always. I've never fixed it because being late to something you already know feels different than being late to something you don't. On the table sat a small stack of letters, one from the county about property tax reassessments, 2 catalogs promising a prettier life. I slid the county envelope open with my thumb and read about updated valuations, new language for accessory structures, sub-addresses for outbuildings. A phrase rose up like a tide I'd been hearing in my sleep. Independent access. The Buick returned late. Gravel spoke first, then a courteous idle, as if the engine lowered its voice in church. Headlights painted the garage door into a bright confession. She let it sit before killing the ignition, the way a person sets down a glass and waits for the echo to finish. Through the windshield, her silhouette held still, an idea deciding whether to become a decision. I opened the side door. You left the light on, I said, flicking the pull chain. It needed to breathe, she said, climbing out. She smoothed her skirt like a person smoothing a story. Dad's car doesn't like the dark. Oh, cars don't like being taken, I said. Taken? She laughed once, politely. It's family. You're so literal. Things either are or they aren't, I said. That's gravity. She walked to the front of the Buick and regarded it like a woman complimenting a married man. Sincere, selective. People miss him more when they see it, she said. I'm doing everyone a kindness. Kindness is a bruise you don't show off, I said. You're dramatic for someone who alphabetizes sockets. She kissed 2 fingers and tapped the hood, a blessing arranged like a selfie. Saturday night is the Veterans Park Gala. The mayor's wife is expecting the car. It loosens checkbooks. It loosens discipline, I said. Don't be small. Her smile was polished. Ride along if you like. Tell the story about Dad and the cylinders. I could have told her what Dad told me in the hospital. Don't let anyone take it from its place who wouldn't know how to bring it home. But warnings are for people who think consequences are suggestions. She pulled the gray dust cover over the Buick, careful around the wipers where the fabric catches. She left with a wave that drew perfume through the cold air like an orchard with no dirt under it. The garage settled. I put my palm on the fender. The metal was winter window cool. In the chrome ring, my reflection looked like a man who had practiced patience long enough to use it. There's a quiet that doesn't mean peace. It means calculation. I brought the county letter to the workbench and read it again beneath the bulb's cone of light. If independent access and utilities are established, an accessory structure may be recognized as a separate leasehold and assigned a subaddress. Independent access meant a door onto the alley. Utilities meant a separate meter. Both were things a man could order without asking permission. I took down the tin box with the recipes and set it on the table. In it were titles and receipts, a folded photograph of Dad at the county fair with one hand on the Buick's hood, and, at the bottom, the original survey of the lot. The garage sat like a square cheek against the alley. With the right language, it could be its own animal. Sleep did not come kindly, so morning arrived early. I dressed in flannel and denim and drove to the assessor's office in a truck that starts in weather because it has never been told not to. Inside, the clock was accurate. Counties can't afford metaphor. A woman at the counter watched me with the pleasant suspicion public servants have perfected. I'm here about accessory structures, I said. You and half the town, she replied, sliding a form toward me. Independent access, independent utilities, setbacks met. Maybe we talk leasehold. It's not common. Common is just something people haven't tried yet, I said. Usually it's for a backyard studio, she said. Separate meter is required. If approved, we issue a subaddress. Door has to open to the alley. I nodded. That's the easy part. She stapled the regulations to the application with enough force to sound official. You'll need an inspection. I'll be ready, I said, and left. Back home I measured, corner to corner, concrete to sky. I ordered a steel door for the alley side and a separate electric meter. Money came from a fund Dad called Winter, though he saved into it all year. The installer could come Tuesday. The gala was Saturday. Elaine would practice her smile. In the afternoon she called. You're bringing the Buick Saturday, she said, turning obligation into invitation by tone. Is the car attending under its own power, or are you asking? I said. She sighed. The mayor's wife is expecting it. The mayor's wife expects snow in June, I said. Expectation and entitlement share a bed. For heaven's sake, Richard, it's a car. Go. No, I said, my voice finding the floor. It's a place. Silence stretched, then snapped. Just have it ready, she said. When we hung up, I spread the county papers on the workbench like Dad used to spread carburetor parts. In order, with intention. I read every line until the words felt like tools weight, purpose, limit. Legal language always contains an inch of translation. In that inch, a man can lose a day or rescue an inheritance. You don't give away inches. Enough inches gone, and you have nowhere to stand. That night, I pulled back the dust cover and sat in the Buick with the door open. The leather carries a quiet sweetness old saddle. Faint tobacco someone swore they never smoked. I didn't start it. I held the wheel and watched the bulb make a small moon in the windshield. The car didn't need me to prove love by making noise. It needed me to decide its fate with the same calm weight Dad used when torque met resistance. People think a garage keeps weather off a car. A garage keeps weather off a man. It's where a boy learns the difference between force and finesse, and a father passes on strength without turning it into a weapon. I eased the cover back over the Buick and rested my hand on the curve of the hood. Sleep. I said what Dad said to me when I insisted I wasn't tired. I stood in the doorway looking at the alley for what it could be, an entrance that didn't require permission. Saturday would come with speeches and camera flashes. Let her drive. Let her collect compliments like flowers that wilt by morning. I wasn't hungry for that meal. I was setting another table measured in inches and letters and locks. Sunday morning, a pen made the sound builders hear. I wrote my name where the county asked, hand steady, breath steady, Richard Halberg. The scratch of ink on paper sounded like a small animal moving under a house. Dad used to say you own what you can bring home. I pressed the pen down, lifted it, and set it aside. I intend to. Saturday arrived with a sky the color of polished pewter. I woke before dawn, brewed coffee so strong it seemed carved rather than poured, and stood at the window while the Buick slept under its gray shroud. Elaine's voice from the night before still lingered in my head, sharp, dismissive, confident that the car would be hers to display. She never realized that power doesn't rest in possession, it rests in control of place. I stepped into the garage, pulled the chain, and watched the light bulb breathe life into the shadows. Dust floated like the slow settling of snow. The Buick sat perfectly still, dignified, as though it knew the gala awaited but had no interest in parading. My hand brushed the fender. The steel was cool but steady. A man can trust steel. It does not lie. It only bears weight. Elaine arrived mid-morning in a dress too bright for February, red lips curved like punctuation meant to end arguments before they begin. Keys, she said, casual as ordering coffee. I handed them over without ceremony. I could see her surprise flicker a silent victory in itself. She expected protest, a fight she could win with words. Instead, I gave her silence. Silence leaves people uneasy. It suggests something beneath, something measured. She swept into the Buick as though stepping onto a stage. The engine turned, coughed once, then purred. She grinned through the windshield, tapping the steering wheel like a drum of triumph. You really should come, she called over the sound. It would honor Dad. I leaned against the doorframe, mug in hand. Honor doesn't travel in the backseat, I said. She smirked and drove off, gravel spitting like laughter behind her. The Buick's taillights dwindled, swallowed by town. The house felt cavernous after she left, the kind of quiet that isn't peace but a rehearsal. I laid the county papers out again, reading line by line. Independent access. The new steel door would be delivered Monday. Separate meter. Installation confirmed for Tuesday. Paperwork to be filed by Wednesday. Elaine thought Saturday was her coronation. She had no idea it was only a dress rehearsal for her undoing. I poured another cup of coffee and sat at Dad's old workbench. His tools hung neatly on the pegboard wrenches in graduated sizes, sockets aligned like soldiers, a hammer worn smooth by a lifetime of exact strikes. Each tool was a lesson. Each lesson whispered the same truth. Strength without control is waste. That evening, as expected, the phone rang. Elaine's voice bubbled with the sparkle of champagne. Richard, you should have seen it. Everyone was talking about Dad's car. The mayor said it looked like the town itself was arriving. You sound proud, I said, my tone even. Of course I am. People miss him through this car. I was keeping his spirit alive. Spirits don't need gasoline, I said. There was a pause. She wanted me to be impressed. When I wasn't, she grew sharper. Honestly, Richard, you should be grateful. Without me, the car would be collecting dust in that garage. I let the silence sit. She mistook it for concession. The Buick returned late, headlights slicing through the alley like a blade. She parked it with exaggerated care, as if the applause of strangers could be stored in the tires. I stepped into the garage as she killed the engine. How'd it go? I asked. Perfect, she said. I think Dad would have loved it. Dad loved the garage, I said. Her smile faltered. Don't start with your rules, Richard. The car belongs to all of us. No, I said, steady as the concrete under our feet. It belongs where it sleeps. That was his rule. She rolled her eyes, dismissing the words as relics, as if wisdom grows obsolete with age. You're impossible. She left without another word, her perfume lingering like an unwanted guest. I pulled the cover over the Buick again, slow and deliberate, as though tucking in something sacred. Monday morning, the steel door arrived. The installer cut through the cinder block wall at the rear of the garage, sparks showering onto the concrete floor. By noon, the door opened cleanly into the alley, a second entrance, independent access. I ran my hand along the frame, solid and square. The first inch of ground claimed. Tuesday, the electrician came. He mounted a second meter beside the house, wired the garage's lights and outlets onto its own circuit. I signed the paperwork, his pen scratching approval. By afternoon, the garage had its own breath, its own independence. Wednesday, I carried the completed application to the assessor's office. The clerk looked it over, eyes narrowing at the precision of the documents. Separate access, Separate utilities. You're requesting subaddress assignment? Yes, I said. It'll take inspection, she replied. I'll be ready. By Thursday, an inspector walked the space, flashlight beam grazing the walls like judgment. He tested outlets, opened the new steel door, marked notes on a clipboard. Separate enough, he muttered. We'll approve. Friday morning, the letter arrived. Garage recognized as a separate leasehold, subaddress assigned. I held the envelope in my hand, paper trembling faintly as if it carried more than ink. Dad once told me, "When the dirt, the shiny kneels." That night, Elaine called again, voice bright, expectant. I need the Buick tomorrow. There's a charity dinner at the country club. Everyone's asking about it. Then you'll need to make arrangements, I said. What does that mean? It means the car sleeps in my garage, I said. And the garage is mine. Her laughter was sharp, incredulous. You can't keep it from me. It's family. Family doesn't erase signatures, I said, voice low. What are you talking about? The garage isn't part of the house anymore, I said. It's its own address, its own leasehold, and I hold the deed. There was silence on the other end, the kind that tastes of shock. Finally, she whispered, You wouldn't. I already did. I hung up, the click sounding louder than any argument. That night, I stood in the garage, the Buick gleaming faintly under the light. I placed my hand on the hood and whispered, You're home. The engine didn't need to turn. The victory was not in motion, it was in stillness. The Buick belonged here, and now, legally, unquestionably, the ground beneath it belonged to me. Elaine could borrow applause, but she could never own silence. And silence was mine. I didn't come into the world with much, and truth be told, I never asked for more than I could carry. A boy learns early that in a small Midwestern town, dignity is worth more than applause. My father taught me that with his hands, not his words. He had the sort of silence that filled a room without weight, and when he did speak, it was the kind of sentence that carved itself into you for life. The Buick was never just a car. To me, it was a mirror of the man who raised me. Dad didn't buy it new. He pulled it off a neighbor's lot when it was rusted and coughing smoke, a machine others called a carcass. He looked at it, ran a hand over its ruined hood, and said, Every machine wants to live if you give it patience. Then he towed it into that garage, and for years afterward, he and I breathed life into it, one bolt, one bearing, one polished chrome curve at a time. I remember the smell of those nights, grease under my nails, gasoline sting, leather softening under oil. The garage light was weak, but it threw just enough glow for me to see his face bent in concentration, lines drawn deep, as though the car was etching them into him. My sister Elaine would wander in, curious for a moment, before drifting back to her room where the radio played and her laughter echoed off walls that work never touched. I was the son who stayed when things broke. Dad had his years at the factory, 12-hour shifts that left his body stiff and his lungs sore. When he came home, he went straight to the Buick, sometimes before dinner, sometimes before saying much at all. I learned to keep him company without questions, handing him tools, matching his rhythm, learning when to speak, and when silence meant more. It was in that garage I learned what sacrifice looks like. There were winters when the furnace rattled like it might quit, and the only heat in the house came from the oven door left open. Dad still set aside $10 a week for parts. I remember Mom shaking her head, calling it foolish. But I also remember how his face softened when he sat behind the wheel, turning it like a prayer wheel, knowing someday it would roll again. That someday came slowly. By the time I turned 18, the Buick could move under its own power, coughing smoke like a man waking from a coma. Dad drove it once around the block, parked it, and wiped his hands on his rag. He didn't shout or boast. He just looked at me and said, It'll outlive me, if you mind it. I minded it. Through my 20s, 30s, 40s, I minded it. While Elaine left for college, moved to Chicago, came back with stories of parties and promotions, I stayed. I kept the house after Mom passed. I took over Dad's auto parts shop when his hands grew too stiff. I made payroll, fixed transmissions for neighbors who paid late, sometimes not at all. The Buick stayed in the garage, polished, tuned, waiting. Sacrifice isn't glamorous. It's slow mornings and late nights. It's putting your own wants on the shelf and keeping other people's world turning. I missed vacations. I missed chances. There was a woman once a librarian, soft-spoken, who smelled of old paper and lilacs. We shared coffee once or twice, but when her job pulled her to the city, I stayed. The shop, the house, the garage, they held me like obligations, dressed as anchors. I told myself it was worth it, that Dad's legacy wasn't just metal and land, it was endurance. If you endure long enough, respect follows. That was the lie I wrapped around myself like a coat. When Dad grew frail, it was me he leaned on. Nights at the hospital, it was my hand he held. He whispered in his last hours, not grand declarations, just reminders. Keep the place clean. Mind the Buick. Simple, quiet, exact. He didn't need to tell me about Elaine. He knew. We both did. She came in with perfume and flowers and left with tears staged for hallways. She grieved out loud. I grieved by staying. After the funeral, Elaine drifted in and out of town. She'd appear in bright dresses, speak of investments, charity galas, connections. The Buick was always her trophy to parade, never her responsibility to preserve. She never spent a night on the concrete floor wiping down its chrome. She never turned a wrench in winter cold until her knuckles cracked. She never stayed. But I did, and that was my sacrifice. Years of being the quiet shadow, the one no one clapped for, the one who held the line so others could come and go as they pleased. I gave her the freedom to be careless, because I was careful. Now, when she talks about the Buick as family, I taste iron on my tongue. Family is work. Family is holding on when no one else bothers. Family is sacrifice that goes unnoticed until someone tries to claim the reward. I remember one night in particular, rain hammering the roof, the garage smelling of wet concrete. Dad was sitting in the Buick, engine off, eyes closed. I asked him why he didn't take it out in weather like this. He opened his eyes, met mine in the dim light, and said, "A man doesn't show off what he loves, he protects it." That sentence has followed me every day since. Protecting isn't always loud. Sometimes it's paperwork and patience. Sometimes it's enduring so long that when you finally strike, no one can deny the weight of it. Elaine believes she's the face of Dad's legacy, but faces fade. It's the man in the background who keeps the wheels from falling off. And I've been in the background long enough. The Buick rests in the garage tonight, silent, loyal. I sit at the workbench, tools lined before me, county letter folded once, twice, tucked in my pocket. The sacrifices of a lifetime are not debts, they are investments. And it's time for those investments to pay their return. The older I get, the more I understand that memory is heavier than iron. A car you can polish, a house you can paint, but memory sits in your chest like ballast. My ballast is years of sacrifice that nobody clapped for. Elaine never knew those years. She saw the finished chrome, not the busted knuckles. She saw the Buick roll smooth, not the nights Dad and I sat cross-legged on cold concrete, arguing gently about spark plugs. For her, it's always been about the shine. For me, it's always been about the keeping. The first time she paraded the Buick through town, people looked at her like she had resurrected Dad himself. She drank it in waving, smiling, basking. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching. Neighbors nodded at me, the way people nod at a man who looks like he has lost something. I wanted to tell them the truth that the car wasn't hers, that it was only alive because of me. But dignity sometimes means keeping words where they belong, inside. That night she came back, swinging the keys like jewelry. "Richard, you should have seen it," she said, her lipstick still holding applause. It turned heads. People miss him more when they see this. I remember wiping my hands on the rag Dad used to favor, folding it once, placing it on the bench. "They miss him whether you drive it or not," I said. She laughed, high and light. "Oh, you're so serious. Don't be that way. It's just a car." Just a car. The words rattled in my bones like loose bolts. That Buick is not just steel. It's the sum of sacrifices that never saw daylight. When she calls it just a car, what she's really saying is my sacrifices are invisible. I think back to the shop those years when I worked 6 days a week, fixing cars for half the town. Sometimes I'd see Elaine breeze in with her friends, nails painted, asking for gas money. I'd give her a few bills from the register, never logging them. Sacrifice is quiet theft from yourself, and I was always willing to be stolen from. There were weeks I skipped replacing my own boots so I could buy a part to keep the Buick alive. The Buick didn't complain, it simply waited. Machines understand patience better than people. The week after Dad's funeral, I found myself in the garage late at night. Elaine was asleep in her old bedroom, back in town for a few days of public grieving. I sat in the Buick, the smell of leather worn thin, the dash glowing faintly from the streetlight outside. I ran my hands over the wheel, felt the grooves Dad's fingers had made over decades. "You kept it alive," I whispered. It felt like he was sitting in the passenger seat. For a moment, I swear I heard him clear as day. Don't mistake applause for respect. Respect is built in silence. That sentence hit me harder than any sermon. I realized then that my life had been sacrifice. Stacked upon sacrifice, none of it applauded, all of it respected only by the walls of this garage. Elaine never heard that kind of wisdom because she never stayed still long enough to. She thought Dad's legacy was the Buick Shine. But shine without sacrifice is fraud. It was a Tuesday when she called again, voice bright as always. Richard, the Historical Society is hosting a benefit. The Buick would be perfect for display. I let the silence stretch. She filled it quickly, nervous. Come on, don't be stingy. It's for a good cause. Dad would have loved it. Dad loved the work, not the parade, I said. Oh, stop it. You sound like an old man. I didn't tell her that old men are the only ones who remember what things cost. Not in dollars, in time, in sweat, in years. That evening, I sat in the garage and thought of all the things I'd given up. Trips I never took, women I never chased, dreams I never funded. Also the Buick and the ground it rested on would remain whole. People see sacrifice as weakness, but the truth is, sacrifice is storage. Every quiet choice not to speak, not to fight, not to demand that's fuel, and when the day comes to use it, the engine of revenge turns smoother than any Buick ever built. Elaine doesn't know it yet, but every mile she drives that car only adds weight to my silence. Because silence, in the right hands, isn't empty. It's a ledger, and I've been keeping score. Betrayal never announces itself. It seeps in through small cracks, like water freezing in stone until the whole wall split. For years, Elaine's little trespasses were almost tolerable, taking the Buick for errands, parading it in parades she never lifted a wrench to prepare for. I let it pass. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But betrayal grows bolder when it isn't met with resistance. It was a Saturday afternoon in spring when I saw her cross the line. I had just returned from the parts shop, though I was retired. Old habits die harder than men do. I walked up the lane and heard it before I saw it. The low, steady hum of the Buick, that familiar purr Dad and I had coaxed out of rust decades ago. But this time, the sound wasn't coming from the garage. It was coming from Main Street. I followed the echo, and there she was, Elaine, top down, hair pinned up like a movie star, the Buick gleaming in the sun as if it belonged to her. She was waving at townsfolk as though she'd earned their admiration, pointing out details of the car she hadn't so much as dusted. Daddy's roadmaster, she told Mrs. Phelps at the bakery, voice carrying over the crowd. I keep it running in his honor. Keep it running. Those words lodged in me like splinters. She didn't keep anything running. She didn't change oil in the bitter cold or bleed brakes when they groaned like old bones. She just turned the key, and suddenly it was hers. The crowd clapped politely, nodding, smiling. Some glanced at me in the background. Their eyes carried something I hated: pity. Not respect, not acknowledgement, but pity. Like I was the forgotten brother, the shadow behind the star. That night she pulled into the driveway with headlights bright as theater lights. I stood by the porch, waiting. She stepped out in heels that clicked too sharply against the driveway gravel. Richard, she called. The Buick was a hit. Everyone loved it. They said it was like seeing Dad alive again. I said nothing. She frowned at my silence, then tossed the keys with a little flourish. Don't look so sour. We should share him, you know. This car belongs to all of us. All of us? I said, catching the keys. Yes, she replied. Not everything is about ownership. It's about legacy. Legacy without work is just theft, I said quietly. She tilted her head, smiled like I was a child missing the joke, and walked away. In the days that followed, I noticed small changes. The Buick didn't always return at night. Sometimes I'd wake at midnight, step out to the garage, and find the bay empty. The smell of gasoline fresh in the air like an insult. She had stopped asking, stopped pretending it was temporary. She took it whenever she pleased. One morning I opened the glove compartment and found a stack of flyers from the Historical Society Gala. Elaine's name printed as hostess, the Buick featured as the centerpiece. My father's legacy used as a prop, my work turned into her stage. I sat behind the wheel, fingers on the leather Dad had once stitched. The smell of her perfume lingered faintly on the seat. That was the moment it struck me. She wasn't borrowing anymore. She was erasing my sacrifices, erasing Dad's trust in me, erasing my place in the story. A betrayal doesn't always need words. It can live in gestures, the way she laughed when someone called it her car, the way she waved like a queen in a borrowed kingdom. It was a slow knife, cutting me not with violence, but with dismissal. Neighbors began to talk. Elaine sure keeps that Buick looking sharp, they'd say. I nodded, silent. Correcting them would have sounded petty. Silence was heavier, and I wore it like armor. But armor isn't enough. Not forever. That evening, I walked into the garage, pulled the dust cover over the Buick after she finally returned it, and sat on Dad's old stool. His voice came back to me, steady and certain. Win the dirt, the shiny kneels. She thought she was winning because she had the wheel, but I knew better. A car without a home is a stray, and I had no intention of letting my father's legacy become a stray. That night, as the Buick's engine ticked with cooling metal, I made myself a promise. This betrayal would not be met with shouting. I would not wrestle keys or chase applause. No, my revenge would be quieter, sharper. I would not take the Buick back from her hands. I would take the ground out from under it. By summer, Elaine had stopped pretending altogether. The Buick wasn't Dad's car anymore. It was hers in every conversation, hers in every photograph, hers in every laugh she let loose at the country club. I sat in the diner one Thursday, coffee black, eggs cooling, when I heard it. A woman at the counter said, "Elaine sure takes good care of that Buick. Such a treasure." The waitress nodded. "She says it's been in her family for years." Her family. As if I'd been erased from the bloodline, scratched out of memory like pencil on paper. I folded my napkin, placed it carefully on the plate, and left my breakfast untouched. Hunger didn't matter. What mattered was that the story had changed, and I was no longer in it. That evening, she pulled up in the Buick, radio blaring, window down, waving at kids on bicycles like some hometown queen. She parked crooked in the drive, door slamming like punctuation. "You should have come," she said, stepping out. "People adored it. The mayor said we should enter it in the parade next month. Imagine the exposure." I kept my eyes on the hood ornament, that proud Buick badge, gleaming like it had survived a war. "Exposure kills skin," I said. She laughed, high and careless. "You're impossible. Always so negative." She tossed her purse onto the hood, as if it were any other car, as if the paint didn't carry decades of patience. "Richard, you really need to learn how to share." I looked at her then. Really looked. The woman who once stood in the garage doorway as a girl, holding sockets out to Dad with two small hands. Now she was someone else, entitlement wrapped in perfume, pride floating on borrowed wheels. "You're not sharing," I said. "You're taking." Oh, please," she waved me off. "Don't be dramatic. Family doesn't steal from family." Her words struck deep, because I knew the truth. Family are often the only ones close enough to. The Buick began spending more nights away. She left it at friends' houses, at the country club, once even in front of the courthouse. Each time it came back smelling less like leather and oil, more like perfume and cigarettes. I polished it anyway, my cloth erasing her traces like penance. But betrayal leaves stains you can't wipe away. One afternoon I opened the glove box and found a small velvet pouch. Inside, her business cards embossed with her name in raised letters. Elaine Halberg, event consultant. The Buick silhouette was printed on the card itself, a logo without my permission. She was using our father's car as her brand, his legacy as her business, my silence as her foundation. I sat in the driver's seat that night, doors closed, the world muffled. My reflection in the windshield looked older than my years. I heard Dad's voice again, steady, not cruel. "Respect doesn't come from who drives, it comes from who owns." That was when the last splinter of betrayal lodged deep. She wasn't just taking joyrides anymore. She was building her name on the work I had bled into this machine, rewriting history to erase me. The next morning she arrived bold, dressed for another gala, hand outstretched. "Keys." I held them in my palm, heavy, shining under the garage light. I let the silence stretch, longer than usual, long enough for her to frown. "Richard," she said, impatient. Finally, I dropped the keys into her hand, but my voice was steady. "Drive it as much as you want, Elaine. Parade it, pose with it, pretend." She blinked, surprised. "Well, good. That's the spirit." "Oh." I stepped past her, placed my hand on the garage wall, solid concrete under my palm. "But remember this, cars can leave, garages don't." She laughed, dismissing me as eccentric. But my words weren't for her, they were for me. That night, after the Buick was gone, I sat at the workbench and unfolded the county's regulations again. Independent access, separate utilities, subaddress. A garage doesn't have to belong to the house. A garage can be its own kingdom. Her betrayal had shown me what I already knew. If I wanted to protect Dad's legacy, I couldn't do it with arguments or raised voices. I had to change the ground beneath her feet. She wanted the wheel. Fine. Let her have it. I would take the garage. And when the time came, she'd discover that every road leads home, and I owned home. By the time Elaine had convinced herself the Buick was her crown, I was already sharpening the blade she couldn't see. Not a knife, not a weapon of steel, but something quieter: paperwork, signatures, and the weight of county ordinances. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs in ink. I started with measurements. A tape measure stretched across concrete, numbers whispering possibilities. 12 feet, 16 feet, door to alley. Dad had poured this slab by hand back in 2059. He joked that he made it thicker than the county required so it would outlast him. He wasn't wrong. It would outlast Elaine's claims too. The next step was utilities. I called an old friend Keller, a wiry electrician who had once worked out of the shop with me. "Separate meter?" he asked, squinting at the breaker box. "That's right," I said. He shrugged. "Never seen you waste money before, Richard. What's this about?" "Not wasting," I replied. "Investing." He didn't press. Men like Keller understand that silence often hides the truest reasons. By the end of the week, the garage hummed on its own grid, a heartbeat separate from the house. Elaine noticed nothing. Or maybe she noticed and dismissed it as one of my eccentricities. She came and went with the Buick, always perfumed, always laughing. One afternoon, she rolled into the drive, tires crunching gravel, and shouted through the window, "Richard, you won't believe it, the Buick's going to be featured in the Independence Day parade. They want me front and center." "Front and center," I repeated softly, wiping oil from my fingers with Dad's old rag. She nodded, grinning. "It's perfect. Dad would have loved the attention." "No," I said, calm as stone. "Dad loved the work." But my words bounced off her like rain off wax. I visited the assessor's office again. The clerk, a woman with glasses perched low on her nose, looked at my application. "Independent access? Utilities? You've ticked every box." "Inspection?" I asked. "Next Thursday," she said. I signed where she pointed, my pen steady, deliberate. The sound of ink scratching across the page was louder in my ears than Elaine's laughter ever was. In the meantime, I prepared the garage, cleared out the workbench, scrubbed the concrete floor, installed the new steel door that opened onto the alley. Every action was quiet, methodical, unseen. The Buick sat in its corner, hood ornament gleaming, unaware it was about to be anchored forever to the ground beneath it. At night, I'd sit in the driver's seat, doors closed, breathing in the scent of worn leather and faint oil. I'd think of Dad's voice. "When the dirt, the shiny kneels." Each word replayed like scripture. Elaine thought she had taken the crown. She didn't know the kingdom had already been divided. When the inspector arrived, he walked with the slow caution of a man who'd seen every trick in the book. He checked outlets, doors, measurements. He tapped his clipboard and said, "Separate enough. This garage could stand on its own." "That's the idea," I said. He signed his name. That single stroke of pen felt heavier than a gavel. Elaine called that evening, buzzing with excitement. "Richard, you have to come to the parade. They're even giving me a spot to speak about Dad and the car. Isn't that wonderful?" I stared at the freshly stamped approval papers on my bench, the ink still smelling faintly of authority. "Yes," I said, voice even. "Wonderful." The Buick purred in the driveway later that night, returned from another one of her endless tours. She swung the keys casually, tossed them into my hand, and smiled. "We make a great team, don't we?" I looked at her so sure, so blind, and said, "Teams share the work, not just the shine." She rolled her eyes, muttered something about me being old-fashioned, and walked off. I slipped the keys into my pocket, turned toward the garage, and rested my hand on the new steel door that opened to the alley. Not a team, not anymore. Something stronger, something final. The 4th of July parade came with the same small-town pomp I'd seen since boyhood marching bands stumbling through brass. Fire trucks polished like Christmas ornaments, children waving flags too big for their hands. But that year, it had a new spectacle. Elaine behind the wheel of Dad's Buick, smiling like she was royalty on tour. I stood on the sidewalk, hands folded behind my back, watching her wave. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, her sunglasses reflecting the adoration of neighbors. Beside me, I heard the whispers. "There's Elaine with her father's car. She really keeps his memory alive. Isn't she something?" Each word was a theft, each clap a nail in the coffin of truth. She looked my way once, caught my eye, and tilted her chin as if to say, "See? I've made it ours. Mine." But I didn't flinch, because I already knew something she didn't. Her parade ended at dusk. My plan would last forever. The following Monday, I stood in the county records office. Deed transfer papers spread across the counter. The clerk adjusted her glasses, scanned the forms, and nodded. "So, the garage will be assigned a sub-address, legally recognized as independent property." That's correct, I said. You'll hold the deed personally, separate from the house? Yes, I said. Her stamp hit the paper thunk, a sound that carried more power than any applause Elaine had harvested the week before. With that strike, the ground itself shifted. I walked out with the document tucked under my arm, the sun high and hot, though I felt nothing but a cool certainty. Elaine, meanwhile, grew bolder. She stopped calling before taking the Buick. She spoke at dinners, at luncheons, at church gatherings, each time weaving herself deeper into the story. One evening, she arrived with a man from the Chamber of Commerce. "Richard," she said brightly, "this is Frank. We're discussing putting the Buick in the Heritage Festival next month. Isn't that exciting?" Frank extended a hand, cheerful, oblivious. "Your sister's a real champion for preserving history." I shook his hand, steady. "History doesn't need a champion. It needs a caretaker." Elaine's smile tightened, but she brushed it off, moving on to chatter about sponsorships and photo spreads. She didn't notice me watching her place her purse on the Buick's hood again, as if it were a coffee table. Each careless gesture only proved how far she'd strayed from the truth. That night, after she left, I sat alone in the garage with the deed. The Buick gleamed under the single bulb, quiet, waiting. I whispered to it, the way Dad once whispered to me when I was too young to carry the heavier wrenches. "You're safe now. Whatever road she takes you down, you'll always come home here, because here is mine." The garage seemed to exhale around me, as though the concrete itself understood it had been claimed. Weeks passed, each of her appearances louder, flashier. Photos of her with the Buick appeared in the town paper. She posed in front of banners, wine glasses in hand, speaking about Dad's love of cars, as though she had spent one honest night in Greece. Neighbors began congratulating me, less and less. They didn't see me. They saw her, but I didn't need their recognition anymore. I had the deed, and a deed doesn't clap, it binds. One evening she called, voice sharp with entitlement. "Richard, I'm taking the Buick out of town for a weekend charity event." "No," I said. She laughed, startled. "What do you mean, no?" "The Buick sleeps in my garage," I said calmly, "and the garage is mine. That means it doesn't leave without my say." For the first time, silence held on her end. Then came the hiss of anger. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious," I said. "You'll regret this," she snapped. I looked at the deed resting on my desk, my name written in ink darker than her lipstick. "No," I replied, voice low. "You will." That night, I locked the new steel door, slid the bolt across, and stood in the cool hush of the garage. The Buick sat under its cover, dignified, untouchable. Elaine had her parades, her laughter, her borrowed glory. But I had the keys to the kingdom. And kingdoms aren't won on the street. They're won in silence, on paper, behind walls of concrete. Downfall doesn't come with trumpets. It begins with the smallest inconveniences, the kinds of cracks no one notices until the whole wall groans. For Elaine, the first crack appeared the night she came back late from a banquet, headlights cutting across the yard. She rolled the Buick into the driveway, her laughter still bright from champagne. When she stepped out, she tossed me the keys, with the same careless arc as always. But this time, I didn't reach for them. I simply held up my hand. "Garage is locked." "What?" she said, still half laughing. "Garage is locked," I repeated. "New door, new key." Her smile faltered. "You're joking." "I don't joke with locks." She frowned, heels clicking as she walked to the alley, pulling at the steel door handle. It didn't budge. She tried the front, rattled the side. Solid, quiet, final. "Richard," she called, her voice rising. "You can't lock me out of Dad's garage." "It's not Dad's garage," I said, stepping into the light. "It's mine. Legally." The words hit her harder than any slap. She stared at me, stunned, like the world had tilted without warning. The next morning, she showed up again, sharper this time, no laughter in her voice. "You need to unlock it. I have an event. People are expecting the Buick." I leaned on the doorframe, arms folded. "Then tell them to expect disappointment. Don't be spiteful, Richard. This car brings people together. It honors Dad. You're ruining it with your stubbornness." "No," I said. "You ruined it when you turned his legacy into a costume. I'm just correcting the record." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." I didn't respond. Silence is heavier than anger, and I let it rest between us until she finally stormed off, gravel spitting under her tires. That week, the whispers began. People at the diner asked why the Buick hadn't appeared at the festival. The Historical Society chair sent me a polite letter, hoping for continued cooperation. I folded it neatly and slid it into the drawer. Cooperation wasn't on the menu anymore. Elaine called me 3 times in one night, her voice turning from pleading to furious to desperate. "Richard, don't do this. Everyone expects the Buick. I need it for the gala. You can't keep it from me." I'm not keeping it from you," I said. "I'm keeping it where it belongs." She hung up on me. The Buick sat in the garage, polished and quiet, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The applause she'd built her identity on began to wither. Without the Buick at her side, her speeches rang thinner, her invitations carried less weight. People stopped clapping as hard. Without the car, she was just another voice in a crowded room. One night, she came pounding at the steel door, her fists echoing through the concrete walls. "Open it," she shouted. "I have the right." "No," I said from inside, voice steady. "You think you're clever? You can't do this forever." I let the silence answer her. The garage held its breath, the Buick sleeping beneath its cover like a king behind castle walls. Finally, she gave up, heels stomping away into the night. The next morning, I stepped out into the alley and found tire tracks sharp in the dirt, her frustration etched into the ground itself. I bent down, touched the ruts, and smiled faintly. She was losing her composure, unraveling thread by thread, and I hadn't raised my voice once. Downfall doesn't come in a storm. It comes in silence, in the realization that the thing you thought was yours was never yours at all. Elaine was learning that lesson, slowly, painfully, and I was the teacher. A week passed, and the whispers grew louder. At the diner, folks started asking why the Buick hadn't shown up at the Heritage Gala. "She always promised it," one man said, stirring his coffee. "Funny," another replied. "I heard Richard's the one who keeps it running anyway." On duh. I didn't correct them. I didn't nod either. I just sipped my coffee and let the truth crawl out of the cracks on its own. Elaine, though she panicked. Without the Buick, her charm shrank. She showed up at luncheons empty-handed, her stories growing thin. People wanted to see the shine, not just hear the chatter. And shine was something she no longer controlled. She came to my porch one evening, not in perfume and heels this time, but in flats and a wool coat. Her makeup rushed, a little smudged. She tried for softness. "Richard," she began, voice almost pleading, "can't we work something out? I need the car for the fundraiser next month. Just that one night. You can come too. We can present it together." Together. That word tasted false on her tongue. She didn't want together. She wanted my silence to keep oiling her parade. "No," I said quietly. Her face hardened. "You're making me look belle." "You're doing that yourself," I said. By midsummer, she'd stopped showing her face in town as often. The mayor's wife mentioned at church that Elaine had overpromised. The Historical Society found another car, a 2057 Chevy. Not nearly as fine, but at least available. People muttered that Elaine's word wasn't reliable. That's how downfalls begin. Not with collapse, but with erosion. A little trust crumbles here, a little faith there. By the time anyone notices, the ground is gone. One night, she tried again. Not with words this time, but with action. I woke to the sound of rattling keys scraping in the lock, a handle forced against steel. I stepped into the garage with a lantern in hand, and there she was, her face pale in the weak light, hand frozen on the door. "What are you doing?" I asked, calm but sharp enough to cut. She spun around, eyes wide. I was just, "You were trying to take it," I finished for her. She swallowed, her confidence slipping. "It's mine as much as yours." "No," I said, raising the lantern so its glow fell over the Buick's covered frame. "It's Dad's. And Dad left it in my care. That care now has a deed." The paper rustled in my pocket as if to remind her it existed. She stared at me, realization sinking in like cold water. "You've been planning this," she whispered. "For a long time," I said. She left without another word, her footsteps retreating fast into the night. The next morning, I found her purse on the ground by the steel door, half buried in gravel. Inside was a folded program from one of her galas. The Buick silhouette printed across the front, her name beneath it. Elaine Halberg, preserving history. I burned it in the fire pit behind the house. Paper turns to ash faster than chrome turns to rust. By fall, Elaine's calls grew fewer, her visits shorter. The Buick never left the garage again, and with every event she missed, every invitation rescinded, her voice in town grew quieter. Mine didn't need to grow louder. It never did. Because in the end, silence outlives applause. Winter came early that year. Frost crept across the garage windows, patterns like lace left behind by breath. The Buick sat under its gray cover, patient as ever, a monarch in slumber. I ran my hand along the fabric, feeling the shape of the fender beneath. A car that had outlived its maker, its years of labor, and now outlived Elaine's illusions. By then, her downfall wasn't just rumor, it was visible. The invitations had slowed to a trickle. The Historical Society stopped mentioning her name. At the diner, people spoke of her with the quiet pity reserved for those who had overreached. And every time her name came up, someone would add, "Well, Richard still got the Buick." The truth was settling in the way. Snow settles quiet, unhurried, but impossible to ignore. One night she came again, not in fury, but in defeat. She stood at the edge of the garage, coat pulled tight, her voice softer than I'd heard in years. "Richard," she said, "I don't understand you. All this over a car?" I set down the wrench I wasn't really using and looked at her. "It was never about the car." She frowned, shivering slightly. "Then what?" "It was about the work," I said. "About the nights Dad and I spent here. About the years I kept this place alive when no one else bothered. About respect. You don't get to borrow that and parade it like a crown." Her eyes dropped to the floor. For once, she didn't have a retort. Silence pressed between us, thicker than any argument. The Buick gleamed faintly under the bulb, chrome catching light like truth catching breath. I could feel Dad there, the memory of his quiet lessons wrapped into every corner of the garage. Elaine finally whispered, "So, this is it? You've won?" I shook my head. "There was never a contest. This was always mine to keep. You just thought shine was the same thing as ownership." Her shoulders slumped, the proud tilt gone. She turned and left without another word, her footsteps muffled in the frost. That night I locked the steel door, slid the bolt into place, and sat on the driver's seat of the Buick. The leather held its warmth, the smell of old oil and tobacco faint but comforting. "Sleep," I murmured, as Dad once said to me. For the first time in years, the garage felt whole again. Because revenge isn't about shouting, or humiliating, or tearing down. It's about restoring balance, one quiet inch at a time. Elaine had her parades, but I had permanence, and permanence always wins. Snow fell heavy that February, the kind of snow that muffles the whole world into silence. I shoveled the walk slow, careful, and left the alley untouched. No tracks led to the garage except my own. That suited me fine. Inside, the Buick rested, dust-covered draped smooth as a blanket over its body. The new steel door was locked, the separate meter ticking away, the deed filed safe in my desk drawer. On paper and in stone, the garage was mine alone. That was all that mattered. Elaine had stopped coming by. The calls ended weeks before, her tone shifting from sharp to pleading to nothing at all. The last message she left was quiet, almost broken. "You've taken everything from me, Richard. All I wanted was to share him. But sharing isn't taking." And she never learned the difference. Neighbors still asked after her now and then. "Haven't seen Elaine lately," someone would say at church. Or, "She really burned some bridges, didn't she?" I only nodded. Dignity lives in restraint, and I had nothing left to prove. One afternoon, the mayor himself stopped me in front of the courthouse. "Richard," he said, "we'd be honored if you'd bring the Buick to the Memorial Day parade this year. Folks would like to see it again." I thought of Elaine, of her hat and sunglasses, of her hand waving from behind the wheel as if she had earned the right. Then I thought of Dad, of his calloused hand on my shoulder, of nights spent in the garage with nothing but grease and patience between us. "I'll consider it," I said simply. That night, I sat in the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel. The chrome on the dash reflected the soft bulb above. For a moment, I could almost see Dad's profile beside mine. "You kept it," I whispered. "You kept it home." The Buick didn't answer, but it didn't need to. The silence itself was enough, a silence filled with respect, with memory, with the weight of work done right. Elaine will live with her own echoes. The applause that once chased her has gone quiet. She'll remember the car she claimed, the legacy she thought she could own. And she'll know every night that it sleeps not in her world of parades and banquets, but here, in the garage, with my name on the deed. That's the kind of revenge no one claps for, but it endures. I turned off the light, slid the bolt across the steel door, and let the cold night settle. The Buick, the garage, the silence, all of it mine.